Former President Obama has weighed in on Putin invading Ukraine. Now, there was a very famous back and forth in the 2012 presidential election when it was Obama versus Romney on this issue of Russia and foreign policy. And Obama had a line that at the time was a massive zinger where everybody said he crushed Romney. And so I'm going to play that for you in a second. And then I also want to show you not only Obama's comments in 2012 on the issue of Russia, but also Obama in 2016. And this is even after you had everything go down with Crimea, where Putin effectively took Crimea, and I think it was 2014. So even after that, Obama came out, was asked about Russia and Russian aggression and weighed in on it. And he even referenced specifically if Russia goes into Eastern Ukraine, which is literally exactly what's happening right this second. So, look, these are old comments that you're going to see, but they're directly pertinent to what's happening now because he cites the exact thing that ended up happening and he gives his opinion on it. So first, let's look at the debate back and forth.
Governor Romney, I'm glad that you recognize that al-Qaeda is a threat because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back because the Cold War has been over for 20 years. But, Governor, when it comes to our foreign policy, you seem to want to import the foreign policies of the 1980s, just like the social policies of the 1950s and the economic policies of the 1920s. You say that you're not interested in duplicating what happened in Iraq, but just a few weeks ago you said you think we should have more troops in Iraq right now. And the challenge we have, I know you haven't been in a position to actually execute foreign policy, but every time you've offered an opinion, you've been wrong.
So now people are bringing this up and saying Mitt Romney was right, Mitt Romney was right, Mitt Romney was right. No, I don't think so. I still disagree with Mitt Romney on this. The question is, who's the biggest threat to the United States? And at the time, the answer was obviously al-Qaeda. And it wasn't Russia. And even today, Russia is a giant threat to Ukraine. Now, if we get too involved and, we put U.S. boots on the ground or whatever, yeah, then maybe Russia will become a big threat to us. But if we handle it in a responsible way and an intelligent way, Russia is not the biggest threat against us. You could say, hey, they're now clearly a giant threat to global order and rules-based internationalism, but so are we. and we're actually, honestly, in a larger sense, we're a bigger threat to that. Now, that's not whataboutism, and that's not saying that what Russia's doing isn't aggression and imperialism and condemnable. It definitely is. But make no mistake about it, we support 73% of the world's dictatorships. We give them arms and funding. And then we turn around and pretend like we support democracy and human rights. My ass cheeks, we support democracy and human rights. We're running around pretending that a guy named Juan Guaido, who didn't win an election in Venezuela, is currently the president of Venezuela. That's simply not true. We are currently occupying a large portion of Syria for the stated reason of stealing their gas or their oil. That's not me speaking. Donald Trump came out and admitted it. He said it. We're currently aiding and abetting a genocide in Yemen. We're helping Saudi Arabia do a genocide in Yemen. We're doing ruthless sanctions on Afghanistan, where millions of people are starving. So that we are a bigger threat to, the rules-based order, the international law. And I still think Obama's right here. Yeah, Russia is a giant threat to Ukraine. They invaded Ukraine. That is condemnable. That is wrong. We should take actions in response. Certain sanctions I would do as long as it doesn't hurt Russian civilians. But I still don't think it's fair to say that Mitt Romney was right here. I don't think that at all. Because the question is, who is the biggest threat to the United States? That's different. And in terms of who we're even competing with the most on the global stage, the answer is obviously China. Obviously China. They've now grown massively. They're doing the Belt and Road Initiative, which is just like empire by another name and by another tactic. Empire through, getting countries into debt and building them infrastructure and then, exploiting them for their natural resources. It's just a smarter way of doing imperialism. And so they're gigantic. They're massively powerful. Since 2012, they've been built up in a big way. So if you want to have that conversation about who's the second biggest power or the biggest threat to U.S. hegemony, the answer is obviously China. It's not Russia. Russia's actually a declining power. So everybody's giving Mitt Romney credit for this. I simply don't agree. I don't agree. And I'm sure Romney in 2014, when Russia was taking Crimea, Romney was saying, see, I was right. But again, the question is, who's the biggest threat to the United States? Now, Obama weighed in. In 2016, he was asked about Russian aggression and what they're doing. And his answer is interesting. So take a look at this. This is from The Atlantic and I think Jeffrey Goldberg. Obama's theory here is simple. Ukraine is a core Russian interest, but not an American one. So Russia will always be able to maintain escalatory dominance there. The fact is that Ukraine, which is a non-NATO country, is going to be vulnerable to military domination by Russia no matter what we do, he said. I asked Obama whether his position on Ukraine was realistic or fatalistic. Quote, it's realistic, he said. But this is an example of where we have to be very clear about what our core interests are and what we are willing to go to war for. And at the end of the day, there's always going to be some ambiguity. He then offered up a critique he had heard directed against him in order to knock it down. I think that the best argument you can make on the side of those who are critics of my foreign policy is that the president doesn't exploit ambiguity enough. He doesn't maybe react in ways that might cause people to think, wow, this guy might be a little bit crazy. Let's continue. Let me show you the next part. Quote, there is no evidence in modern American foreign policy that that's how people respond. People respond based on what their imperatives are. And if it's really important to somebody and it's not that important to us, they know that. And we know that, he said. There are ways to deter, but it requires you to be very clear ahead of time about what is worth going to war for and what is not. Now, if there is somebody in this town that would claim that we would consider going to war with Russia over Crimea and eastern Ukraine, they should speak up and be very clear about it. The idea that talking tough or engaging in some military action that is tangential to that particular area is somehow going to influence the decision-making of Russia or China is contrary to all evidence we have seen over the last 50 years. Obama went on to say that the belief in the possibilities of projected toughness is rooted in mythologies about Ronald Reagan's foreign policy. So look, that's Obama saying in no uncertain terms, if somebody really wants to go to war over Crimea or eastern Ukraine, they should be honest and say that. They should speak up and say that. And I agree with that point. If somebody really thinks we should have American boots on the ground for Crimea or eastern Ukraine, say it. Don't dance around it. Just say it. Just own it. Own that position. There's one thing I despise more than anything else. People obscuring their real position. And clearly on this front, it annoys Obama. In other ways, Obama was hawkish, but I always gave him credit on normalizing relations with Cuba. I always gave him credit on the Iran deal, and I gave him credit on how he handled the situation in Crimea, because that could have escalated and spiraled out of control and been a total disaster, but I think he was level-headed, and I think he was reasonable in how he responded. They did some sanctions, but they didn't go insane with it. Now, honestly, I feel similar to how Biden's handling it, because I have no doubt that Biden's getting a tremendous amount of heat and pressure from the foreign policy establishment. So the intelligence agencies, the deep state. I guarantee you they're telling him, you got to go harsher. You got to go stronger. You do the SWIFT banking sanctions. Cut Russia off from the global banking system right now. Put more U.S. boots on the ground. Put boots on the ground right on Russia's border. I guarantee you people are telling him this. And to this point, he's largely avoided doing the most extreme stuff. I think he responded in a proportional way that deters without escalating. So he did the kind of sanctions that he did. He sanctioned 2 different banks in Russia. He cut off Russia from financing their debt on Western markets, and he sanctioned oligarchs and axed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I think that makes sense. He didn't do SWIFT sanctions. He didn't go too far. He was very clear, no U.S. boots on the ground. So I do think that the Biden approach is similar to the Obama approach, and that's the best path forward. Again, the only difference I would have done from what Biden did is I would have said, yes, Ukraine is not in NATO and will not be part of NATO. Because then you cut off what Putin says is his biggest concern. And so then if he turns around and continues to invade anyway, you get to say to the rest of the world, and they'll agree with you now, oh, I guess that wasn't actually your main concern. I guess that was a lie. I guess that was a cover story. I guess you were going to invade them no matter what. I guess you had other grievances that were equally or more important than the NATO thing, because we gave you what you said you wanted and you still invaded. So I would have done the same thing, but also said Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO. So there you have it. Obama 2012 on this stuff. And honestly, Biden today, I think they're way more reasonable than a lot of other Democrats and Republicans that are talking about this now. And we'll get to these stories as we move along. I got a million of them, but, Fox News the other night, there's a host talking about we need U.S. warplanes doing combat missions over eastern Ukraine right now. That's a guy literally saying we should do World War III for funsies. Just casually. Yeah, let's go do that. You got other Fox News hosts like Peter Hegseth comes out and says, Biden needs to be tougher on Putin. Tell me exactly what you want. What exactly do you want Biden to do? Tell me. Tell me. Because anything that Biden does that's above and beyond what he already did is a giant escalation and will lead to massive blowback and will lead to huge economic consequences and will lead to, oh my God, we're getting closer and closer to World War III. So you got Republicans, oh my God, Newt Gingrich comparing Putin to Hitler and all this stuff going on the right that's just crazy, right-wing media and right-wing politicians. But then you also have other Democratic politicians like, get tougher. And, Democratic media. CNN, MSNBC. MSNBC had on John Bolton. We'll talk about that later. That guy's a neocon, warmonger, imperialist criminal. The guy's got blood on his hands. And they invite this guy on who's been wrong on everything when it comes to foreign policy to casually give his opinion on foreign policy. And you'll never guess what he wants to do. Get tougher on Putin. So I think Obama had a level head on this stuff. I think Biden has a level head on this stuff. Maybe Obama slightly more level-headed. Not sure. We'll see. Time will tell. But make no mistake about it. They're effectively fighting a battle behind the scenes between nefarious forces that would escalate even further. So cross your fingers and hope it doesn't get too bad. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take $0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.